The sleek, obsidian black electric car hummed to a silent stop in the designated CEO parking spot, the gentle whir of its engine a stark contrast to the rumbling gas guzzlers surrounding it. 9:45 a.m. Tuesday. Jamal Preston, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, exited the vehicle with an almost preternatural calm. He wasn't thinking about the weight of the acquisition, the millions of dollars on the line, or the skeptical eyes that would undoubtedly be on him today. His focus was laser-sharp, attuned to the subtle symphony of the underground parking garage, the distant clang of a service elevator, the dripping water echoing off concrete pillars, the faint scent of exhaust fumes mingling with the sterile aroma of cleaning solutions. You ever see someone who doesn't have to say anything to let you know they mean business? That was Jamal. He paused, his hand lingering on the cool metal of the car door, a fleeting image of his grandmother's worn hands flashing through his mind. Her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in him, these were the anchors that kept him grounded amidst the swirling currents of ambition and expectation. A faint smile touched his lips. He closed the car door, the soft click of punctuation mark in the silent narrative of his arrival. He moved with an unhurried grace, his footsteps echoing slightly in the cavernous space. The weight of the CEO title felt strangely comfortable, like a well-worn coat he'd finally grown into. This wasn't arrogance. It was a quiet confidence born from years of relentless work, strategic maneuvering, and an unwavering belief in his own capabilities. He knew the challenges that lay ahead. Stratwell Solutions wasn't just a company. It was a microcosm of societal biases, a place where assumptions were often more powerful than facts. He'd seen it during the acquisition process, the subtle dismissals, the veiled skepticism. Today was the first day of dismantling those invisible walls. As he neared the elevator bank, a gruff voice cut through the stillness. "You lost, buddy. Executive parking's on the other side." Jamal turned to see a man in a faded Stratwell Facilities uniform, a name tag reading Rick Donnelly pinned somewhat haphazardly to his chest. Rick's arms were crossed, his expression a mixture of suspicion and annoyance. He sized Jamal up, his gaze lingering on Jamal's polished shoes, then traveling upwards to take in the expensive suit. Internally, Rick scoffed. Another overpaid consultant probably, here to stir things up and then disappear with a fat bonus. He'd seen this song and dance before. Jamal met Rick's gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "I'm Jamal Preston," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The new CEO." The air crackled. Rick's jaw slackened, his face flushing a dull crimson. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken assumptions. He'd made a judgment, a snap decision based on appearance, on ingrained biases he hadn't even realized he possessed. The blood pounded in his ears, a mixture of embarrassment and indignation warring within him. He stammered. Jamal held his gaze, not with malice, but with a quiet intensity that made Rick shift uncomfortably. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding, Rick," Jamal said, his voice still even. He paused, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify the awkwardness. Then, he added, "Perhaps a company-wide email introducing myself would have been helpful. I'll make a note of that." He stepped into the waiting elevator, the doors sliding closed smoothly, leaving Rick standing there, a mixture of shame and bewilderment churning within him. The silence of the garage seemed to amplify his humiliation. He ran a hand over his face, his thoughts a chaotic jumble of regret and self-recrimination. He had been so sure, so quick to judge. He'd been at Stratwell for 20 years, seen CEOs come and go, and he'd never the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Charles, a distinguished figure with silver hair and a perpetually thoughtful expression, stood waiting, his eyes fixed on Jamal. Beside him stood Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, her expression carefully neutral, but a flicker of curiosity in her eyes betrayed her interest. She'd heard whispers about the new CEO, a whirlwind of rumors and speculations. He was an outsider, a disruptor. Some saw him as a savior, others as a threat. She was reserving judgment, waiting to see him in action. Charles extended a hand. "Jamal, welcome. I trust you had a smooth journey." "Uneventful," Jamal replied, his handshake firm and confident. He met Charles's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This was the old guard, the established power. He knew they were watching him, assessing him. Danielle observed the exchange, her analytical mind dissecting every nuance of their interaction. There was a subtle tension in the air, an unspoken understanding of the power dynamics at play. She could sense the weight of expectation on Jamal's shoulders, the pressure to prove himself, to justify the disruption he represented. "I believe you've met Danielle," Charles said, gesturing towards her. "Briefly, during the acquisition process," Jamal replied, his gaze meeting Danielle's. He paused, a flicker of a smile playing on his lips. "I look forward to working with you more closely, Danielle." His words were simple, professional, yet Danielle felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just politeness. It was a genuine acknowledgement, a recognition of her importance within the company. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive attitude she'd often encountered from previous leadership. "Likewise," Danielle responded, her voice steady, but a faint warmth spreading through her. She was intrigued. This wasn't the aloof, corporate automaton she'd expected. There was a depth to him, a quiet intensity that hinted at a different kind of leadership. As they walked toward the conference room, Jamal turned to Charles, his voice low. "I had an interesting encounter in the parking garage. A facilities manager, Rick Donnelly." Charles's expression tightened slightly. "Rick, yes. He's been with us for a long time. Perhaps a refresher course on company etiquette is in order," Jamal said, his voice still calm, but with an underlying steel. "It seems some of our employees are operating under outdated assumptions." Charles nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "I'll see to it personally." Danielle listened, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a parking lot incident. It was a statement of intent. Jamal wasn't just here to manage the bottom line. He was here to reshape the very fabric of the company culture, to dismantle the ingrained biases that held them back. She felt a surge of anticipation, a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this new CEO might actually be different. The conference room doors swung open, revealing a room full of expectant faces. The air was thick with anticipation, with the unspoken question of what the future held. Jamal stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting each pair of eyes with a steady, unwavering gaze. He knew the challenges that lay ahead, the resistance he would face. But he also knew that he wasn't just here to lead a company. He was here to change a culture. And he was just getting started. The sleek, polished marble of the Stratwell Solutions lobby reflected the overcast sky outside, a subtle chill permeating the air despite the building's climate control. Jamal Preston, his tailored suit a quiet statement of authority, stood amidst the muted hum of activity. The echoes of the previous scene, the tense introductions and veiled assessments, still resonated within him. He adjusted the strap of his briefcase, a small, almost unconscious gesture betraying a flicker of the unease he was determined to keep concealed. "This is it," he thought, the weight of the words settling deep within his chest. Day 1. The elevator doors, a mirror-like surface reflecting the stylized logo of Stratwell Solutions, beckoned. He took a step forward. "Hold it right there." The voice, gruff and edged with suspicion, stopped Jamal mid-stride. He turned to face the source, a man of stocky build, his face etched with years of ingrained routine, his name tag identifying him as Rick Donnelly, facilities manager. Rick's eyes, narrowed and assessing, swept over Jamal, lingering on the briefcase. An immediate distaste curled within Rick. Another delivery driver clogging up the lobby, no doubt. Couldn't even be bothered to use the proper entrance. These new acquisitions, always disrupting the established order. He'd seen it 100 times before. Preston and Company, fancy name, but they all blend together after a while, he thought dismissively. "You lost or something?" Rick's tone dripped with impatience, his gaze flicking towards the security desk as if contemplating calling for backup. Deliveries go through the loading dock on the south side. The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken assumptions. Jamal felt a flicker of irritation, quickly tamped down by a wave of calm resolve. He'd anticipated this, the subtle, insidious prejudice that often clung to the fringes of corporate culture. He wouldn't be the first black CEO to navigate this landscape, and he certainly wouldn't be the last. "I'm here for the 10 a.m. meeting," Jamal replied, his voice even and measured, betraying none of the internal struggle to maintain his composure. He met Rick's gaze directly, a silent challenge in the depths of his dark eyes. "Conference room B." Rick scoffed, a sound that grated on Jamal's nerves. "That's executive level, reserved for senior leadership only." The dismissive tone, the unwavering certainty in Rick's voice, it all spoke volumes. He hadn't even considered the possibility that Jamal could be anything other than what he appeared to be in his limited perception. Another one trying to pull a fast one, Rick thought, a familiar cynicism hardening his features. "Probably thinks he can just waltz in here and—" "I'm Jamal Preston," Jamal stated, his voice cutting through Rick's internal monologue. "Preston and Company." The words hung in the air, a sudden shift in the atmosphere. The subtle hum of the lobby seemed to quiet, as if holding its breath. Rick's eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The name echoed in his mind, a faint bell of recognition starting to chime. Preston and Co. wasn't that? The thought remained incomplete, suspended in a moment of dawning comprehension. The arrival of Danielle Cruz punctuated the tense silence. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, a counterpoint to the hushed anticipation. She scanned the lobby, a slight frown creasing her brow. Spotting Jamal, her expression softened, a hesitant smile touching her lips. "Mr. Preston," she called out, her voice carrying a note of tentative relief. "Charles has been waiting for you. We were starting to wonder if you'd gotten lost." Her gaze shifted to Rick, a subtle question in her eyes. Rick, still grappling with the sudden revelation, felt a wave of heat flush his cheeks. The implications of his actions, the assumptions he had made, crashed down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat, strangled by a sudden surge of shame. Jamal, sensing the shift in Rick's demeanor, allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on his lips. He turned towards Danielle, his voice regaining its usual warmth. "My apologies for the delay. There seemed to be a slight misunderstanding." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He glanced back at Rick, his gaze conveying a mixture of understanding and a silent challenge. This is just the beginning, he thought, a sense of quiet determination solidifying within him. Changing the numbers on a balance sheet is one thing. Changing a culture, that's the real challenge. The elevator doors finally opened, inviting them into the inner sanctum of Stratwell Solutions. As they stepped inside, the lobby seemed to exhale, the tension slowly dissipating. But the echoes of the encounter lingered, a subtle reminder of the work that lay ahead. The acquisition wasn't just about merging companies. It was about merging perspectives, dismantling preconceived notions, and building a future where assumptions wouldn't stand in the way of potential. And Jamal Preston, standing tall and resolute, was ready to lead the charge. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, the polished steel reflecting the muted glow of the lobby's recessed lighting. Jamal stepped inside, the subtle aroma of lemon-scented cleaner clinging to the air. He pressed the button for the 18th floor, the slight vibration beneath his feet a tangible reminder of the ascent to come. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. His first day, he smoothed down his impeccably tailored suit, a navy so dark it absorbed the light. "Don't let them see you sweat, Preston." He repeated the mantra internally, his reflection staring back at him. A quiet confidence settled in his eyes, betraying none of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. The doors were about to close when a hand shot out, stopping them abruptly. Rick Donnelly, flushed and slightly out of breath, stumbled in. The same Rick Donnelly who just moments ago had directed him towards the loading dock with a dismissive wave and a condescending "deliveries around back." The awkward silence that descended was thick enough to choke on. Jamal watched, impassive, as Rick fumbled with his key ring, the metallic clinking echoing in the confined space. He felt a flicker of amusement, a small, private victory he wouldn't allow to show. He wondered if Rick remembered the exchange. He was betting he did. The way the man's gaze darted everywhere, but at him, spoke volumes. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed, each floor a tick on the internal clock of Rick's discomfort. Jamal could practically feel the man's internal struggle, the frantic scramble for an explanation, an excuse, anything to bridge the chasm of his erroneous assumption. The air grew heavy with unspoken words. The silence, punctuated only by the jingling keys and the rhythmic whir of the elevator's ascent. Jamal leaned against the mirrored wall, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. Let it simmer, he thought, the corner of his lip twitching almost imperceptibly. Rick cleared his throat, a sound that scraped against the quiet like sandpaper. He shifted his weight, his work boots scuffing against the pristine floor. Jamal continued to study his reflection, his gaze steady, unblinking. The silence stretched, taut, and vibrating with tension. He knew the apology was coming, could practically taste it on the air, thick with the bitter tang of regret. He wondered how long Rick would let it fester. He wasn't in a hurry. Finally, as they neared the 15th floor, Rick cracked. Didn't realize you were the CEO," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush, each syllable heavy with the weight of his misjudgment. Jamal turned slowly, his gaze finally meeting Rick's. "You didn't ask," he replied, his voice calm, even a quiet undercurrent of steel running beneath its surface. Rick flushed a deeper shade of red, his gaze dropping to the floor. "It's just we get all kinds of people walking through," he mumbled, the excuse sounding as hollow as it was. "You can't be too careful these days. Is that right?" Jamal's voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it held a weight that filled the small space. He saw Rick flinch, the subtle movement betraying the man's internal struggle. He was battling more than just embarrassment. He was wrestling with the ingrained prejudices that had led him to such a blatant misjudgment. The elevator slowed, the gentle deceleration mirroring the slowing of Rick's internal panic. The doors opened on the 18th floor, revealing the sprawling office space of Stratwell Solutions. Jamal stepped out, pausing at the threshold. He turned back to Rick, his gaze holding the man's with a quiet intensity. "Mr. Donnelly," he began, his voice low and steady. "I understand that assumptions are easy, comfortable even, but they can also be dangerous, especially in a place like this." He gestured towards the bustling office, the employees moving with a frenetic energy that belied the underlying tension he'd already sensed. "We're building something here, something more than just a company. We're building a culture, and that culture starts with seeing each other, truly seeing each other, not just the surface, but the person beneath it." Rick's gaze flickered, a spark of understanding igniting in his eyes. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "To understand, Mr. Preston," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. He met Jamal's gaze, a flicker of genuine remorse evident in his eyes. "I apologize for my mistake." Jamal nodded, a slight incline of his head that conveyed more than words ever could. "Apology accepted, Mr. Donnelly. Now, if you'll excuse me." He turned and walked into the office, his stride confident, his shoulders squared. He could feel the weight of the eyes upon him, the curious stares of the employees who had witnessed the exchange, or at least heard whispers of it. He didn't falter. He walked towards the large glass office that overlooked the city, the future headquarters of his vision. He wasn't just here to run a company. He was here to dismantle the walls that divided them, brick by brick, assumption by assumption. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, approached him hesitantly, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He could sense her internal debate, the cautious optimism warring with the ingrained skepticism that permeated the company. He offered her a small, genuine smile, a silent acknowledgement of the shared challenge that lay ahead. He knew this was just the beginning, the first crack in the facade, the first step towards building something real. Charles, presumably the former CEO or chairman, observed the scene from a distance, his expression unreadable. He watched Jamal with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty, his eyes narrowed in thoughtful contemplation. The shift in power was palpable, a subtle yet seismic change in the very air they breathed. He had handpicked Jamal, seen something in a younger man's quiet strength, his unwavering vision. He hoped he hadn't made a mistake. The future of Stratwell, he knew, rested not just on the balance sheets, but on the delicate balance of power, perception, and the quiet revolution brewing within its walls. This elevator ride, this brief, seemingly insignificant encounter, had been more than just an apology. It was a prelude, a glimpse into the kind of leader Jamal Preston intended to be. The elevator doors slid open with a hushed sigh, revealing the pristine, hushed expanse of the 18th floor. Jamal Preston stepped out, his polished shoes clicking softly against the polished marble, the sound echoing strangely in the stillness. He adjusted the lapel of his impeccably tailored suit, a subtle gesture that belied the intricate tapestry of thoughts and anxieties woven within him. This was it, his first day. The weight of responsibility, the sheer magnitude of the task ahead, transforming Stratwell Solutions, pressed down on him, a tangible force. He'd anticipated the challenge, the resistance, the subtle, perhaps even overt, pushback from a company steeped in its old ways. But standing here, at the precipice of this new era, a flicker of doubt, a fleeting whisper of insecurity, danced at the edges of his confidence. He inhaled deeply, the faint scent of lemon polish clinging to the air, a sterile, almost antiseptic fragrance that mirrored the impersonal perfection of the space. He pushed the doubt aside, replacing it with the steel resolve that had brought him this far. Ahead, the double glass doors of conference room B shimmered, the muted murmur of voices filtering through the thick pane. He could make out the silhouettes of figures moving within, shadows in a play of power and anticipation. This was his stage, his moment. He smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from his tie, a small, almost unconscious gesture of self-assurance. He was ready. As he approached, the conversation within momentarily ceased. Heads turned, eyes met his. He felt the weight of their scrutiny, a palpable force that seemed to dissect him, measure him, categorize him. He recognized Charles, the former CEO, his expression a complex blend of curiosity and cautious welcome. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, offered a hesitant smile, her eyes holding a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, perhaps hope? Or was it apprehension? He registered the subtle shift in their postures, the almost imperceptible straightening of spines, the subtle acknowledgement of his arrival, his authority. He met their gazes head-on, his expression carefully neutral, betraying none of the turbulent emotions swirling within. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm even. He allowed a small, professional smile to touch his lips. It was a deliberate choice, a carefully calibrated gesture meant to convey confidence, not arrogance. Inside, a different dialogue unfolded. "They're watching me, analyzing every move, judging every word." He pushed the thought away, focusing on the task at hand. He needed to establish his presence, his leadership, not through force, but through quiet, unwavering competence. A voice boomed from behind him, breaking the fragile silence. "Hey you, can you grab me a coffee? Black, 2 sugars." Jamal turned, his gaze settling on a man he hadn't noticed before. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, his face a mask of casual entitlement. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken assumptions, with the ingrained biases of a culture that saw him, not as the CEO, but as something else entirely. The silence that followed was thick, charged. Jamal felt a surge of anger, a hot, prickly sensation that tightened his chest. He doesn't see me. He doesn't even register me. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. This wasn't just about a cup of coffee. This was a microcosm of the entire problem at Stratwell, the ingrained prejudice that he needed to dismantle brick by painstaking brick. He opened his mouth to respond, to address the slight head-on, but before he could speak, Charles's voice cut through the tension. "Rick, we're good in here." The words were simple, almost understated, yet they carried a weight, a finality, that echoed in the sudden stillness. Rick blinked, his face contorting in a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. He looked from Charles to Jamal, his eyes widening as if he were only just now seeing him, truly seeing him for the first time. The casual arrogance that had permeated his demeanor just moments before evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. The subtle shift in power dynamics in the room was palpable. Jamal felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and a lingering unease. This was a small victory, a minor skirmish in a much larger war. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't engaged in a power struggle, yet he had asserted his authority simply by being present, by allowing the inherent absurdity of the situation to speak for itself. Rick stammered, "Oh, I didn't." His words trailed off, lost in the sudden, awkward silence. He looked at Jamal, his eyes filled with a mixture of embarrassment and something akin to fear. He seemed to shrink before Jamal's gaze, his earlier bravado completely gone. "You can join us, Rick," Jamal said finally, his voice still calm, even. He didn't want to humiliate the man, but he needed to make a point. This wasn't about personal animosity, but about establishing a new paradigm, a new way of interacting, a new respect for the position he held, regardless of who occupied it. Rick swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He nodded, his face flushed, and slipped into the room, taking a seat at the far end of the table, as far from Jamal as possible. The atmosphere in the room was thick with unspoken tension. Danielle Cruz avoided Jamal's gaze, her fingers fidgeting with a pen, her own thoughts a turbulent mix of shock and a strange, unsettling admiration. Charles watched Jamal with renewed interest, his eyes narrowed in thoughtful appraisal. He seemed to be reevaluating his initial assessment, recognizing perhaps the steel beneath the calm exterior. Jamal took his place at the head of the table, the weight of their gazes still heavy upon him. He met their scrutiny head-on, a quiet strength emanating from him. He knew this was just the beginning, the first crack in the edifice of ingrained prejudice. He had a long road ahead, a daunting task of transforming not just the financial trajectory of Stratwell Solutions, but its very soul. But he was ready. He had to be. The air in conference room crackled with a tension so thick it felt almost palpable. Sunlight, filtered through the sheer blinds, cast long, geometric shadows across the polished mahogany table. Jamal Preston, the newly appointed CEO, stood at the head of the table, his posture deceptively relaxed, a faint smile playing on his lips. He could feel the weight of scrutinizing gazes, a silent interrogation radiating from the assembled executives. "They're sizing me up," he thought, waiting for me to stumble. The thought sparked a flicker of amusement, a private acknowledgement of the challenge, rather than fear. He had anticipated this. He had prepared for this. Rick Donnelly, still flushed from the earlier encounter in the hallway, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The memory of his dismissive words, his assumption, played on a loop in his mind. Shame, hot and prickling, warred with a stubborn refusal to fully accept his error. "He's just a figurehead," a rebellious voice whispered in his thoughts, another suit brought in to shuffle papers. Yet, the quiet authority Jamal exuded, the unsettling calm in his eyes, chipped away at Rick's ingrained prejudices. Charles, his face a mask of professional neutrality, watched Jamal with an intensity that bordered on predatory. He had handpicked Jamal, seen the potential beneath the polished veneer, but a sliver of doubt still lingered. Could he truly handle this? He wondered, the question echoing not just his own uncertainty, but the unspoken anxieties of the entire company. Danielle Cruz, her gaze fixed on the intricate pattern of the conference table, fought to control the tremor in her hands. She had been at Stratwell long enough to witness the slow creep of stagnation, the insidious spread of complacency. Jamal's arrival, the sudden disruption, ignited a fragile spark of hope, a yearning for something different. But fear clung to the edges of that hope, a fear of disappointment, of another broken promise. Jamal's voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, conversational, yet it commanded the room. I've spent the last few weeks immersing myself in Stratwell's history, its successes, its challenges. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, giving them weight. His eyes, dark and perceptive, swept over the faces around the table. They expect grand pronouncements, sweeping declarations. He mused, but real change starts with honesty, with acknowledging the cracks in the foundation. And I've come to a rather unsettling conclusion. He let the silence stretch, drawing them in. We become comfortable, complacent. We've allowed ourselves to believe our past achievements guarantee future success. His gaze lingered on Charles. He knows this. He's felt it too. A ripple of unease went through the room. Whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, broke the stillness. Jamal allowed it to build, to fester. Then he raised a hand, silencing the room instantly. 5 years ago, he continued, his voice now edged with steel. Stratwell was a pioneer, an innovator. Today, he trailed off, letting the unspoken implication hang heavy in the air. He turned his attention to Rick, a direct, unflinching gaze. This morning, I encountered a perfect illustration of the problem. Rick's face flushed crimson. The whispers intensified. He's going to humiliate me, Rick thought, his stomach twisting into knots. But Jamal's next word surprised him. Mr. Donnelly mistook me for a delivery driver. An understandable mistake, given certain assumptions. He paused, his eyes holding Rick's. Not a condemnation, an observation. Assumptions about appearance, about background, about who belongs in what role. He shifted his gaze to encompass the entire room. These assumptions, these unconscious biases, are not just offensive. They are detrimental to our business. They blind us to talent, to potential, to innovation. The air in the room crackled with a different kind of tension now, a charged silence that hummed with unspoken truths. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. He sees it. He actually sees it. A wave of something akin to exhilaration washed over her. Charles leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, assessing. A calculated risk, he thought, a bold move. He recognized the strategy, the calculated dismantling of the old guard, the subtle yet powerful shift in the power dynamic. Jamal's voice resonated with newfound authority. I didn't come here to blend in. I came to lead. I came to clean up what should have been fixed 5 years ago. He paused, letting the words sink in. And that starts with dismantling the barriers we've erected within our own walls. He then launched into a detailed analysis of Stratwell's current market position, exposing hidden weaknesses, outlining strategic vulnerabilities with a precision that left the executive speechless. He spoke of outdated technologies, of missed opportunities, of a culture of complacency that had allowed their competitors to gain ground. He cited specific examples, quoted figures, presented data that challenged their long-held assumptions. His voice, though calm and measured, carried the weight of undeniable truth. With each point he made, Rick's initial resentment crumbled, replaced by a dawning realization. He's right, he thought, the admission a bitter pill to swallow. We've been asleep at the wheel. He looked at Jamal with new eyes, seeing not a threat, but a lifeline. Charles, a faint smile playing on his lips, felt a surge of satisfaction. He's not just capable. He's exceptional. The gamble had paid off. Danielle, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and anticipation, felt the stifling weight of the past begin to lift. This is it, she thought, the change we've been waiting for. Jamal concluded his presentation, his gaze sweeping over the room, meeting each pair of eyes with unwavering confidence. We have a choice, he said, his voice resonating with conviction. We can cling to the past, or we can build a future where innovation thrives, where talent is recognized, and where unconscious bias has no place. He paused, his eyes locking with Rick's. "I, for one, choose the future." The silence that followed was no longer charged with tension, but with a sense of shared purpose, a collective understanding of the challenges ahead, and the dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they had found the leader they desperately needed. The air in Conference Room B, once heavy with apprehension, now thrummed with the quiet energy of transformation. The stale air of Conference Room B, thick with the residue of polite tension and forced smiles, thinned slowly as the last of the senior management team filed out. Jamal Preston, newly minted CEO of Stratwell Solutions, stood by the long mahogany table, the weight of the room settling around him like a second skin. The initial meeting, his official introduction to the company he now helmed, had been an experience. He'd anticipated resistance, of course. The acquisition had been swift, unexpected, a ripple of disruption in the otherwise placid waters of Stratwell's existence. But the subtle undercurrent of something else, something that clung to the edges of polite corporate greetings and carefully worded questions, had left a lingering unease. He rubbed a hand over his tired face, the faint scent of sandalwood from his aftershave a small comfort in the sterile environment. He'd prepared for this, meticulously researched every aspect of Stratwell, every key player. Yet, the reality of stepping into this role, of facing the palpable skepticism in the eyes of some of his new team, was a different beast altogether. He thought of his grandmother, her quiet strength echoing in his memory, a reminder of the resilience he carried within him. He straightened, the subtle shift of his shoulders a silent reaffirmation of his purpose. He was here to lead, to build, to mend. Footsteps echoed softly in the otherwise empty room, a hesitant rhythm that made him turn. Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, a man whose initial introduction had been a masterclass in passive-aggressive dismissal, stood awkwardly near the door, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Jamal watched him, a flicker of curiosity mingling with the fatigue. Donnelly had seemed the embodiment of Stratwell's entrenched resistance, a man clinging to the old ways, the old hierarchies. His earlier comments, veiled under the guise of practical questions, had been sharp, pointed, laced with a subtle disdain that Jamal recognized instantly. He'd seen it before, the unspoken judgment, the assumptions based on nothing but the color of his skin. Donnelly shifted his weight, his gaze flitting around the room, avoiding Jamal's direct eye contact. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of his ID badge, the plastic clicking softly, a counterpoint to the silence. Inside, storm raged. Shame, hot and prickly, warred with a stubborn pride. He'd spent years at Stratwell, seen CEOs come and go. But this one was different. He'd judged him, dismissed him, based on nothing but a first impression, a preconceived notion. And now, seeing the quiet strength in Preston's posture, the unwavering calm in his eyes, Donnelly felt a wave of self-reproach wash over him. He'd allowed his own biases, his own ingrained prejudices, to cloud his judgment. He took a deep breath, the air catching his throat. "Mr. Preston," he began, his voice rough with unspoken emotion. His internal monologue screamed at him to turn around, to walk away, to pretend this moment wasn't happening. But something held him rooted to the spot, a strange compulsion to face the consequences of his actions. He swallowed, forcing the words out. "I misjudged you earlier. I apologize." He looked up, finally meeting Jamal's gaze. I didn't see a CEO when you walked in." "I saw," he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Jamal studied him, his expression unreadable, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. A myriad of thoughts flitted through his mind. He could dismiss it, brush it off as an insignificant incident. He could point out the blatant prejudice, the subtle digs veiled as polite inquiries. But something in Donnelly's posture, the raw vulnerability in his eyes, stopped him. He saw not just an individual's prejudice, but a reflection of a larger issue, a systemic problem that had likely festered within Stratwell for years. This wasn't just about him. It was about the culture he was inheriting, the culture he needed to change. Takes guts to say that, Mr. Donnelly, Jamal said finally, his voice quiet but firm. I appreciate it. The words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the room. Relief washed over Donnelly, a wave of unexpected gratitude for the unexpected grace. He hadn't expected forgiveness, hadn't even dared to hope for it. Jamal stepped closer, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He looked at Donnelly, not with judgment, but with a quiet understanding. You're not alone, Mr. Donnelly. We all carry biases, conscious or unconscious. The important thing is to recognize them, to acknowledge them, and to actively work against them. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the empty room, as if addressing the invisible presence of the entire company. Stratwell is at a crossroads. We're not just integrating two companies, we're integrating two cultures. And that requires honesty, transparency, and a willingness to challenge our own perceptions. Donnelly listened, the weight of Jamal's words sinking in. He hadn't just apologized for a personal slight. He'd opened a door to a larger conversation, a conversation that Stratwell desperately needed to have. He looked at Jamal, a new respect dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just a CEO, this was a leader who understood that true strength lay not in wielding power, but in fostering understanding. The silence that followed was different now, no longer thick with tension, but filled with a sense of possibility. The air, once stale and heavy, seemed to clear, replaced by a fragile hope, a shared understanding that a new chapter had begun, a chapter where judgment would give way to accountability, where assumptions would be challenged, and where true change could finally take root. The late afternoon sun, filtered through the blinds of Conference Room B, cast long, geometric shadows across the polished mahogany table. The room, smaller and more intimate than the auditorium where Jamal had addressed the entire company earlier, held a different kind of tension. It was the tension of introspection, a quiet hum of anticipation that vibrated in the air. Jamal could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the unspoken questions hanging heavy in the silence. He inhaled deeply, the faint scent of lemon polish mingling with a lingering aroma of coffee from the earlier presentation. He'd chosen this smaller setting deliberately, wanting a space conducive to the more difficult conversation he was about to initiate. Around the table sat a handful of Stratwell's key personnel. Danielle Cruz, head of strategic operations, sat with her hands clasped in front of her, a slight furrow in her brow suggesting a mind wrestling with complex thoughts. Charles, his face an inscrutable mask, observed Jamal with a steady gaze. His presence was a silent acknowledgement of the power shift, a tacit endorsement of the new leadership. And then there was Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, his appearance here surprise, a flicker of something akin to hope igniting within Jamal. Rick's earlier dismissal, his dismissive comment about Jamal's appearance, had been a stark reminder of the ingrained biases he was determined to uproot. Thank you for joining me, Jamal began, his voice calm but resonant, each word carefully chosen. He met each gaze in turn, holding their attention. This isn't just about business strategy. It's about changing hearts and minds, he thought, a quiet resolve solidifying within him. This morning, we spoke about numbers, about growth, about market share. But there's another, more fundamental aspect of Stratwell's future that we need to address. He paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to lean into his words. Danielle shifted slightly in her seat, the faintest rustle of fabric breaking the stillness. What was he getting at? She wondered, a flicker of unease dancing at the edges of her curiosity. She'd witnessed Jamal's quiet authority, his unwavering composure in the face of Rick's blatant disrespect. It was a kind of leadership she hadn't seen before at Stratwell, a leadership that hinted at something deeper than mere business acumen. Charles remained impassive, his expression giving nothing away. He'd seen CEOs come and go, each with their own style, their own agenda. He was waiting, watching, assessing. This young man has fire in him. He mused, but does he have the wisdom to temper it? I want to talk about perception, Jamal continued, his gaze settling on Rick. He could see a flicker of defensiveness in the older man's eyes, a tightening of his jaw. "I've spent my career walking into rooms like this," he said, his voice softening, a hint of vulnerability coloring his tone, "only to be treated like I wandered into the wrong one." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. He saw Danielle's eyes widen slightly, a spark of understanding igniting within them. Rick shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "He's going there," he thought, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He'd heard whispers about Preston's background, his rise from a challenging upbringing. He dismissed it, labeling it another diversity hire, a token gesture. Now, looking into the man's eyes, he saw a strength, a quiet dignity that challenged his preconceived notions. "How many good ideas," Jamal continued, his voice gaining strength. "How many innovative solutions? How much potential have we ignored simply because they didn't come from the expected source?" He scanned the faces around the table, his gaze lingering on each one. "Because they didn't fit our preconceived notions of what a leader, an innovator, a valuable contributor should look like." Danielle felt a wave of shame wash over her. She prided herself on her objectivity, her data-driven approach. But Jamal's words resonated with a truth she'd been unwilling to confront. "How many times have I dismissed an idea, a suggestion, simply because it didn't align with my expectations?" She questioned herself, the realization unsettling. Charles, his expression finally breaking its stoic facade, leaned forward. "You're talking about unconscious bias," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. He'd read articles, attended workshops, but it had always felt like a distant, abstract concept. Jamal's directness, his willingness to confront the issue head-on, forced him to acknowledge its pervasive presence within their own walls. "Precisely," Jamal affirmed, meeting Charles's gaze. "And it's costing us. It's costing us talent, innovation, and ultimately, it's costing us our future." He looked at Rick, his expression softening. "Mr. Donnelly," he said, "I understand you've been with Stratwell for a long time. You've seen this company evolve. I'd value your perspective on this." Rick, caught off guard by the direct address, swallowed hard. He felt a mix of shame and a strange sense of liberation. He'd spent years operating within a system that rewarded conformity and penalized those who dared to step outside the established norms. He'd become part of the problem without even realizing it. I admit, I made a judgment about you, Mr. Preston," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, "based on nothing but appearances." He met Jamal's gaze, a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. "And I was wrong." The air in the room shifted, the tension easing, replaced by a palpable sense of shared vulnerability. Jamal nodded, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. "We all make assumptions, Mr. Donnelly. The key is to recognize them, to challenge them, and to actively choose to do better." He looked around the table, his gaze firm but encouraging. "I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame. I'm here to build a better Stratwell, a Stratwell where everyone has the opportunity to contribute, to innovate, to thrive, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their beliefs." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Are you with me?" The silence that followed was different now. It wasn't the silence of apprehension or uncertainty. It was the silence of contemplation, of commitment, of a collective willingness to embrace change. And in that silence, Jamal knew that he'd planted a seed that, with careful nurturing, could blossom into a new era for Stratwell Solutions. The glass doors of Stratwell Solutions shimmered, reflecting the bruised hues of the twilight sky. 7 p.m. The city lights were beginning to prick the deepening blue. Jamal Preston stood on the sidewalk, the cool evening air a balm against the simmering intensity of the day. He drew a slow, deep breath, the scent of exhaust fumes mingling with the faint sweetness of nearby, flowering jasmine. 2 meetings down. 1 acquisition successfully navigated, and a lifetime of ingrained prejudice chipped away at, 1 conversation at a time. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, the gesture a quiet ritual of grounding himself. His reflection stared back, a man carved from quiet strength, and unwavering resolve. He saw not just his own face, but the faces of his mother, his grandmother, his ancestors, all those who had fought for a seat at tables where they weren't invited. He remembered his grandmother's words, a low murmur in the humid Alabama air. "Boy, you gotta build your own table if they won't let you sit." He'd been a skinny kid then, all elbows and knees and righteous anger, confused by a world that saw his skin as a barrier. Now, standing before the gleaming edifice of Stratwell Solutions, he understood. He hadn't just earned a seat at this table. He bought the whole damn building. Footsteps echoed behind him. Charles, his silver hair catching the last rays of the setting sun, approached. Jamal watched him in the glass, a flicker of something unreadable in Charles's gaze. Curiosity? Apprehension? Perhaps a touch of both. "You ever get tired of having to prove it?" Charles's voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he were testing the waters of an unfamiliar stream. Jamal turned, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You want the truth?" "Always." The words hung in the air between them, a quiet confession, a shared understanding of the invisible burdens they carried. Inside, a deep weariness settled in his bones, a familiar ache. It wasn't the weariness of the day's work, but the weariness of a lifetime spent navigating a world designed to keep him out. But there was something else too, a flicker of defiance, a stubborn refusal to yield. He was tired, yes, but he was far from broken. He recalled the encounter with Rick Donnelly, the facilities manager, earlier that afternoon. The man had looked him up and down, a subtle sneer twisting his lips. "You the new guy?" he'd asked, the emphasis a clear indication of his disbelief. Jamal could practically hear the unspoken words hanging in the air. "You? Running this place?" In that moment, a familiar wave of anger had threatened to engulf him. He'd felt it before, the sting of dismissal, the weight of assumptions. But he'd learned to control the tide, to channel the rage into something more productive. He had simply met Donnelly's gaze, his own expression unreadable. Jamal Preston, CEO. He'd extended his hand, forcing Donnelly to acknowledge him, to confront the reality standing before him. The man's hesitation, the slight tremor in his hand as he shook it, had been a small victory, a crack in the wall of prejudice. Later, in the second meeting, while discussing operational strategies, he'd subtly redirected Donnelly's suggestions, highlighting the inherent biases in his proposed cost-cutting measures, which disproportionately affected the cleaning and maintenance staff, a predominantly minority group. Donnelly had flushed, his eyes widening in a mixture of embarrassment and dawning comprehension. It was a small shift, a subtle change, but Jamal knew it was a start. "It's not just about proving it to them, Charles," Jamal said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked out at the city lights, 1,000 stories flickering in the urban tapestry. "It's about proving it to myself, about showing that kid back in Alabama, the one who dreamed of something more, that it's possible." He remembered the rickety chair he'd dragged into the living room as a child, determined to sit with the adults, to be part of the conversation. They'd chuckled, amused by his persistence. But he hadn't cared. He'd found his space, claimed his voice. "You don't wait for a seat, baby," he murmured, the words more to himself than Charles. "You bring your own chair." Charles stood beside him, silent for a long moment, the city lights painting his face in shades of amber and gray. Jamal could sense the wheels turning in his mind, the slow churn of understanding. Finally, Charles spoke, his voice tinged with a newfound respect. "You think you can change things here, Jamal?" Jamal met his gaze, the city lights reflected in his dark eyes, burning with a quiet intensity. "Change doesn't just trickle down, Charles. It rises up. It's in the conversations we have, the choices we make, the biases we confront within ourselves and in others." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the cityscape. "It starts with one chair, one voice, one moment of truth, and it spreads like ripples in a pond." He knew the road ahead would be long and arduous. Stratwell Solutions was more than just a company. It was a microcosm of a world grappling with its own deeply ingrained prejudices. But as he stood there, bathed in the twilight glow, he felt a surge of something akin to hope. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a catalyst, and he was ready to ignite the change. He had his chair, and he was here to stay.